Why do you feel like this is the right time to speak out?
Because he has taken advantage of and hurt a lot of people, and that needs to stop.
So we've been covering the story of London Real and Brian Rose for about a year now, from the digital freedom platform scam that raised nearly $1 million to his current bid for London Mayor. The springboard for all of this was the YouTube channel London Real, which started as a two-person show with co-host Nic Gabriel.
Brian and I used to listen to a podcast called The Joe Rogan Experience. In fact, we still listen to Joe Rogan Experience. And we'd meet every now and then in the West End of London.
We were talking about philosophy, politics, women, money, everything that two guys do discuss.
Until one day, Nic was simply gone. Now, Nic has never spoken about what happened back then, until now.
I think that was probably one of the things that was so difficult for me, was the abruptness and the callousness nature with which he terminated that relationship. It was just like, done. Your usefulness to me is finished. I'm just cutting you out. I'm never speaking to you again.
So Nic and I have been in touch since last summer, and it never really felt like the right time to record this interview.
You know, Brian Rose isn't all bad. The guy taught me many things. I think that's probably part of the allure, is that there are certain elements within him that he's working with that are appealing and that do have some truth and goodness to them. The problem is it's just so poisoned by all the other narcissism and the huge ego and the total lack of respect and love for and empathy for his fellow humans. It's a facade. It's literally a narcissistic mask that he wears. Like, I'm this guy who's out to like face my demons and figure out who I am and, you know, help people. And that's why it's so dangerous, because there's this little kernel of truth that he's mimicking, and that's the act, right? But if you scratch beneath the surface, you will very quickly realize that he is an empty human being. And I've often thought about what is it that's driving that insatiable lust for fame and power and money. And it's this void within him that he is trying so hard to fill.
Watching London Real isn't about judgments or conclusions. It's about the journey.
To savor every moment, you know, every single minute, there's something going on, and it is all about the journey.
So Nic Gabriel, aka Nic Gabriel, you co-founded London Real. You were the co-host of London Real initially many years ago. And we've been in contact since about this time last year, but now feels like the right time to have this conversation. How are you doing, and how are you feeling about this chat we're about to have?
Yeah, I'm feeling really good. I know we were going to do a similar chat a year ago, and I think we both expressed reservation. It's my understanding your reservation was you didn't want to give Brian more exposure at that point, because I think that's kind of what he was feeding off, is like, there's no such thing as bad publicity, was probably his motto at the time. I, in particular, didn't want to give him publicity, but also I'd adopted the mindset that speaking out about him and what happened was just not really classy. I just thought, like, let me just put that to bed. I never really spoke since it happened 8 years ago. A lot of people in that time have asked me about it, and I just didn't feel it was right to speak out. However, the thing that's caused me to change my mind on that is I'm realizing that the guy he's taking advantage of people. And if my voice can help a few people not get taken in by him and not A, lose money, but B, also become corrupted by him, then it's worth speaking out about it.
Yeah, and I think both of us have lots of concerns about the impact that Brian's having on a lot of things that we really care about. Mm-hmm. Self-development, personal growth, ayahuasca, lots of these topics that And I would say he's incredibly good at weaponizing those. And like I said, we first connected last summer, and I appeared on your podcast to talk about spirituality, masculinity, and some of the other topics that we share an interest in. And then we've kept in touch since then. And I agree. We both felt this sort of sense of, is this gossipy? Is this necessary? Is this just drawing more attention to Brian? And what has changed my perspective in particular is, like, when you're going for political office, if you're going for London mayor, and at the moment it doesn't look like he's likely to get there, but he does have all of this kind of effectively plastering his face all over the city. It's an opportunity to potentially get more people to sign up for the courses. So I think that for me changes the calculation as to whether it's the right thing to do and the right time to do it.
I'm the same. I mean, the London mayor thing, that's not really the thing that causes me to want to speak out. For me, I've just yesterday I was on LinkedIn and I saw a post by some guy who had it was a YouTube video. He had some guy who had fallen for one of these business accelerator courses of London Reels and Brian's, and I just saw how much it had hurt him, both financially and also his pride. You know, he was wounded on many levels, and I just I think that's more the thing that I'm wanting to stop than anything else.
And you've never spoken out publicly about what happened around the time of the ending of that relationship?
No, I've never spoken publicly. This is the first time.
Do you want to start maybe with how it began? Like, start at the beginning, how it began, and then take us through the story of what happened?
Sure. I met Brian, I think it was in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. It might have even been a little bit earlier than that. It might have been 2009. He became a jiu-jitsu student of mine, a private student. I was teaching jiu-jitsu at the Roger Gracie Academy in Northwest London. And he started taking private lessons with me. And that's actually a part of the story, which I think is quite interesting, is keep in mind that it'll become apparent later on why this is important, but he never took any group classes. He would only take private lessons with me in particular. And the truth is that he was a decent student and we became friends. We hung out outside of the context of that particular relationship. I think we went for lunch a couple of times. We just hung out. We became friendly. And there was a point, I think it was in early or late 2010, if I'm not mistaken, that we were walking in London. We used to take these long walks in central London, actually in the West End, and just talk about life and philosophy and our interests. And at that point, we were both listening to the Joe Rogan Experience and both enjoying it. And I don't remember which of us said something, but one of us said to the other, we should do something like that, because Brian had just left his job as, I don't want to say a banker, because that's another element of the story that isn't true. Brian was never a banker. He was a stockbroker at a company called ICAP. And he had just hit his magic number, his retirement number, where he said, I'm going to retire when I make this amount of money. And he had made that amount of money and he said, I'm out. And that, I got to be honest, that was something I really respected and admired. I was like, wow, imagine if I could be retired when I think he was 41 or 40 at the time. And he was looking for something to do. I was wanting to expand a little bit beyond martial arts. And we decided we should give this thing a go. We should create a video show / podcast, which I came up with the idea of calling it London Real. And because that was the premise that the show was built upon, it was authenticity. We were going to be, two reasonably cool guys who had interesting perspectives on the world and just wanted to figure things out. We just wanted to figure out how to become more self-actualized, have more fun, make a bigger impact, and just do something cool, right? I think that was for me the undercurrent that I always tapped into with London Real is we're doing something cool. It's like it's avant-garde, it's cutting edge, it's risque, it's exploratory, and we're gonna do something cool that hopefully gets us a lot of new friends, helps us enjoy a lot of new experiences, hopefully makes us some money. And that was the premise, or at least that's the premise that I signed up for. That was the primary thing he brought to the table, was the equipment and the venue. And what I brought was my network. At that time, I was a pretty well-known jiu-jitsu instructor. I had a pretty big network of esoteric and interesting people. And that was kind of the symbiosis that occurred there. So we started working together, and very quickly it developed some traction. It became reasonably popular, and it just grew from there.
And then what happened?
So I think the turning point was when I returned I went to the Amazon in December 2012 for an ayahuasca retreat, which was, I always say my life is divided into two periods. It was before that trip and after that trip. I had a very profound experience. And prior to that, I could sense there was definitely a lot of contention, a lot of strife within that working relationship. Things weren't great between Brian and I, but we were still working together. I came back from that, and we went and recorded that interview. And after the interview, we had a brief chat. The interview was detailing my experiences about ayahuasca. I noticed he was quite strange during that show, or during the recording of that show. And then he said to me, "Oh, like, we should talk about the future of London Real." And he said, "What are your thoughts?" And I think I said, "Look, Brian, I don't really know what to do. It's obviously clear that things aren't great between us. And we'll just need to figure out how to move forwards." And we kind of left it at that. And then he started to do some strange things. Like, he would call me up. We had a pretty set routine. We'd record one day a week and then get together another day to work on promoting the show. And then one day he just called me and said, "Hey, I don't need you to record the interview today. I'm going to get one of my friends to do it," which I thought was a bit odd. I was like, okay, I thought we were co-hosts. But I was like, maybe he wants to, just get a bit of fresh energy in the show. And then the next week, the day before our scheduled interview, he called me up and said, "Hey, I'm gonna take London Real in a new direction." And I kind of knew what he was doing. It was the strangest thing. I remember that phone call. I knew what he was doing, but at that point, I think I was just too weak to stand up to him. That's the honest truth. I was just too weak. I think I was a little bit psychologically scattered from the ayahuasca experience. I think I was a little bit inexperienced when it came to business, and I didn't know that legally what he was doing was not right, and that I could have made a legal case against him. And I basically just said, "Okay, Brian, I understand." And from that point forwards, he changed all the email addresses and basically changed the proverbial locks. I mean, I don't know if he ever changed the lock on the building, because I never went back, but everything, all the digital things that we had access to, including the email addresses and the shared documents and everything, were just totally changed. And he never spoke to me again. There is one, actually, that's not true. He never spoke to me again. He sent me a message a few weeks later when everyone was saying, "Where's Nic? Where's Nic?" People were starting to ask what had happened to me because he didn't address that. And I got a very strongly worded email saying, "Hey, we need to have a united front when we address the press about where you've gone." And I just replied to him saying, "If anyone asks me, I'm going to tell them the truth." That was my response. And I didn't hear from him for many years. In fact, I sent him an email, or it might have even been a written letter, just saying how disappointed I was in the way things went down, and that he was someone I really looked up to. I just can't believe I used to look up to that guy, I should mention. And just never spoke to him again. And then funny enough, last year, I think he reached out and we had a reasonably cordial email exchange, but that was it. That was it. And I think that was probably one of the things that was so difficult for me, was the abruptness and the callousness nature with which he terminated that relationship. It was just like, done. Your usefulness to me is finished. I'm just cutting you out. I'm never speaking to you again. I've subsequently realized that is a hallmark of narcissistic personality disorder. It's called the discard, and it's a phase in a relationship between a narcissist and someone else where they have no longer found use for that person, they do what's called a discard, in which they there's an abrupt cessation of that particular relationship. And that was, I think, the thing that upset me the most, to be honest.
And how would you summarize that experience at the time?
I was deeply hurt, and I was angry with myself for not seeing it. Several people over the couple of years that Brian and I worked on that show had asked me very specifically. I remember it was a very specific question. 2 people asked me, "Do you trust Brian Rose?" And strangely enough, one of the things I tell people, there's this theory that people will always tell you who they are. In fact, I think the quote is by Maya Angelou. She says, "People will show you who they are, so believe them the first time." And I remember Brian gave me a book at one point. It was called Pimp, P-I-M-P, by a gentleman named Iceberg Slim. And he gave me this book and he said, "This is the most important book you will ever read." So I took the book home and I read it, and I was pretty disgusted by it. It was all about a literal pimp. It was his autobiography of how he used to use women, how to extract the most value out of them as prostitutes, and then how to discard them and find the next one. And it was his manifesto, basically. I mean, at the end of the book, there was some kind of redemption, and he did change his ways. But I remember thinking to myself, this is weird. A lot of Brian's behavior seems to mimic the stuff in this book. And I remember thinking to myself, surely he cannot possibly think that this is a good way to move through life. Like, surely he can't. But looking back, I realized that's exactly what he does. He uses people. There was another point where we were talking about, he had a business, something that fell out between him and a business associate when he was a stockbroker. And I remember him getting really frustrated, and he said, "I don't get it. It's just business. Why can't people understand that it's just business?" And that to me set an alarm bell off as well. I realized this guy, he has no value for human beings. It's just what they can get out of him. That's what a relationship is to him. It's like, what can this person do for me? And I think, to me, if I had to sum up everything, David, I'm just so disappointed in myself that I didn't see that more clearly. I think largely I have a part to play, which was that I was pretty blinded by the wealth. Like, he was very successful. He had a lot of the things that I thought I wanted at the time. And also, there was obviously something within me that he was able to manipulate, something unhealthy within me that he was able to manipulate and pull the strings, And now that I'm a lot more psychologically healthy, it's almost like when I see the guy, it's almost laughable to me that I ever respected him in any way, let alone looked up to the guy. But there is one other thing I have to say, that I was thinking a lot about this interview, and Brian Rose isn't all bad. The guy taught me many things. He taught me a lot about work ethic. He is an incredibly hardworking individual. He did teach me how to raise my game professionally and do things in a very professional manner. There's no way he would have built London Real to what it was. And there's no way he and I would have started it off and made it such an early success if I hadn't adopted his work ethic and his sense of professionalism. So I think that's probably part of the allure, is that there are certain elements within him that he's working with that are appealing and that do have some truth and goodness to them. The problem is, it's just so poisoned by all the other narcissism and the huge ego and the total lack of respect and love for and empathy for his fellow humans.
Yeah, because that's the interesting thing, is that I was interested. I met Brian once when Jamie Wheel went on his show a while ago. And at that time, I was interested potentially to get Brian on Rebel Wisdom, because I'd seen enough. Like, I kind of thought there's obviously his real corporate side, but there's also the ayahuasca documentary and this sort of sense of, he's got the capability to kind of look at himself, and which I was kind of intrigued by. And it's fascinating to see, firstly, how little of that there is, and how little of that there's been since this time last year and the Digital Freedom Platform and all of that, sort of where things seem to have definitely turned. But also, I know we wanted to cover as this sort of the weaponization of stuff like that, like the ayahuasca experience, like the personal growth mentality, all of this stuff that just seems to be quite easily turned into something else as a money-making thing for London Real and Brian Rose.
One of his former employees reached out to me several years ago, and we were discussing this. And one of the things he said, an observation he made, is that Brian Rose is literally empty. He's an empty human being, right? There's an expression. It's one of my failings is that I speak too much I quote too often, but it is a very powerful quote, which is, some people are so poor that all they have is money. And I think with Brian Rose, he's a shell of a human being. He's literally like this narcissistic husk of a human being. And what he does is he mimics. He doesn't create anything intrinsically from within himself. He has no connection to the source. So he sees people who have something valuable and something real and mimics it. He's mimicking the truth and then packaging and trying to sell it to people. But it's a facade. It's literally a narcissistic mask that he wears. Like, I'm this guy who's out to like face my demons and figure out who I am and, help people. And that's why it's so dangerous, because there's this little kernel of truth that he's mimicking. And that's the act, right? But if you scratch beneath the surface, you will very quickly realize that he is an empty human being. And I've often thought about what is it that's driving that insatiable lust for fame and power and money. And it's this void within him that he is trying so hard to fill. I wouldn't be surprised if that big billboard of his face that's appearing everywhere in London was just the desire to have his face on a big billboard. I mean, I doubt it's because he really wants to be mayor of London. I know he probably does, because that will lead to more exposure and more fame and whatever else it is he's looking for. But the truth about that guy is that he is so empty that he feels that fame, power, money, adulation will fill that within him. And that's the craziest thing, is that he is telling people, I have fulfillment to sell you. And he literally has none of it. And I just find that it's almost comical. It's a tragic comedy, to be honest.
Yeah, the irony of this is why it feels kind of compulsive almost, because he's put himself in a situation where he will be scrutinized, and there's so much for people to scrutinize. But it is also, I think you're right about, when I saw those billboards, it's like, yeah, there are very few things that you can do. And a political campaign is one of the only ones where you can have a billboard of yourself and say, this, Brian Rose will solve everything. Like, even when you're running a business, it's not just about you, it's about whatever the business is doing. Politics is the only frame, the only excuse for putting like just yourself up front as the thing. And so it kind of makes perfect sense, but what doesn't make sense is I just can't understand how he thought he was going to go through an election campaign and not be scrutinized and not be held up and his backstory not be kind of exposed. One other thing you said about, I think for you and I, we kind of look at him, we kind of laugh, but it's clearly not the case. I mean, we just watched a video of his volunteers.
One idea why you love being in the volunteer army. For me, it's the mission. Namida, what is it for you?
It's Brian Rose, his belief in freedom of speech.
I'll tell you what, it's integrity. And no other politician's got that. Brian's got it in spades.
Super important.
It's about a true leader who is conscious, is not afraid to look into his own shadows, to be human and relates to people as people.
And it was extraordinary to watch it, because the things that they were saying, one of them said, he's a man who's looking at his shadow. Another one said, he's all about freedom of speech. Another one said, Brian Rose has got authenticity in spades. And it's like...
That is the literal definition of the cliched statement, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. He is you know, when I look at him now, you know, he always was trying to project this issue of, this image of being a tough guy, you know, like, you know, he's a fighter. That's why he's putting like videos up of him punching the punch bag and like breakdancing and doing these raps. And he's got this kind of strange fascination with hip hop and gangster culture from the south side of Los Angeles, actually, which is where I'm at the moment, from South Central LA, which, don't get me wrong, I get it. Like, there's very cool stuff to be learned from all those guys, all those black dudes who've made it out here despite, discrimination and poverty. And I get that. It's something to be admired. But Brian kind of thinks he's one of those guys. And the truth is, he's just a wealthy dude from Southern California. You know, I mean, he comes from a wealthy background. He's not a tough guy. And that ties into the other thing, which was, he would always come, as I said in the beginning, he would always come do private lessons, but he would never go to the group classes. And what I realized is, someone said to me, it's because his ego is too fragile. He couldn't face losing to one of the other students, right? But like, let's say he's training with me, that's safe because he's paying it as a transaction. And if he beats me, I'm the black belt instructor, that's okay. But if he goes into the class and loses to another one of the white or blue belts, it was just too much for him. And I remember, I always found that strange, but now I understand what it is. It's this desperation to be seen as a strong man. And that's what this whole thing is built upon. It's like that little wounded child within him is so desperate for recognition and love and, all those things we crave. And for some reason, he couldn't find it because again, I don't know what happened in his childhood. I know there was some issue, and I'm not judging the man for it. I had difficulties in my childhood. Almost all of us did. But the problem is, instead of addressing it in a healthy way, he's addressed it it's kind of turned in on itself. It's become twisted, and it's turned into this caricature, which is this, look at me, I need power, I need this, I need that. And again, we all have these elements within us. There are all times when we have acted narcissistically. There are all times where we've acted with braggadocio and bravado. We all have times when we've acted in those ways. But the issue with Brian, which I think is dangerous, is that now this level of fame and influence has basically poured gasoline on the fire of that particular thing. And unfortunately, he did not have the ability to observe it and check that aspect of his ego. So now that fire is raging out of control. And the result that we have is someone who's seeking absolute power and absolute authority. He's not going to be mayor, but if he did, I think that would just be the first step. And I don't know what the next step would be, but I think it's pretty scary. Right? It's pretty scary. And I truly hope that those people that we saw in that video today, I just hope they see the truth of what he is. And I hope he sees the truth of what he is, because that's the only way this will ever be resolved. There is another reason I actually wrote this down on my notes for today, but I forgot to address it. There is something that's very close to my heart, which is plant medicine, in particular ayahuasca. And I think Brian is really, the way he represents himself in the world is really giving that medicine a bad name. I used to think that plant medicine was a cure-all, and that I couldn't understand how I'd meet certain people who drank ayahuasca and they were still, for want of a better way of putting it, they were still shitty people. I was like, why hasn't the medicine fixed this person? Like, surely it showed them the darkness within them, or it showed them what was wrong, where they were being inauthentic. And what I realized is that it's ultimately just a tool, and that you can use this tool, but if you don't do the work, not only will it not help you, can actually turn in on itself and become something negative. But that is not a function of the medicine, and it's not an issue with the medicine. It's an issue with the person using it. I've seen people who have literally fallen to the dark side of their own egos through ayahuasca because they didn't check themselves. Right? They literally drank the Kool-Aid, figuratively drank the Kool-Aid, and literally drank the ayahuasca. And I think that keep in mind, if you are considering doing ayahuasca and you look at someone like Brian Rose and think, well, he's still stuck in his ego and he's still a total narcissist, why didn't it help him? It's not the medicine. It's the fact that ego was so strong and so dark, and that person was so unwilling to face the truth that it turned in on itself. So I just really wanted to get that message out there.
Yeah, I mean, I can find a level of empathy for that, because there's such and I think Brian is in some ways a kind of archetypal figure. It's an extraordinary thing to see. And this gap between the Brian in his head and the Brian that everyone else sees is so huge. And I wonder what happens when that collapses, if that collapses. That's a pretty painful position to be in. And I don't know.
Well,
I don't know how that plays out. I assumed that would happen last year at the end of the whole digital freedom platform thing, when his whole audience turned on him and it looked like he was kind of spiraling downwards in terms of his reputation online. But it's extraordinary, and it's compulsive. You can't keep your eyes off it.
It is. If I'm not mistaken, it was Osho who said that the problem with the ego is that it's incredibly heavy to carry around, right? And I think, I'm going to be honest with you, David, there was a period where for many years I was very angry with what happened with London Real. When I saw Brian's this apparent success of it, I'm now starting to realize that itself is a mask and a facade. But when I saw the apparent success of London Real, I was more than a little bit angry and resentful, and more than a little bit jealous. But what I realized now is he is carrying such a huge weight, right? Because he's not acting from a place of authenticity. So not only is he having to keep track of all these lies that he's telling to others, he's lying to himself, right? And that is a very, very heavy burden to carry. I remember Brian never used to sleep well at night. He always had issues sleeping. And I'm starting to realize that that's a consequence. That's a function of living life this way, of screwing people over and moving through the world, seeing what can I get out of people, and then just ditching them once you've used them. It affects your sleep, right? You carry that debt some way or another, or it expresses some way or another, because I think you and I are both of the same opinion that we're part of one whole. And if you hurt someone else, if you hurt the other, you are ultimately hurting the whole, which means you're hurting yourself, right? And I think that's the thing that Brian doesn't really understand, because he is so divorced from his spirit. He's so divorced from the source that he thinks we live in this scientifically materialistic world in which there are no consequences for screwing someone over, because we are all just these organisms that are striving to get resources and power. And he doesn't see the interconnectedness of all things. He doesn't feel that interconnectedness. And that's what allows him to just lie to people and use them and abuse them. And man, that never ends well. It never ends well. If you watch every movie, if you read every book in which there's the kind of narrative of light versus dark, or there's a story, the bad guy always gets in the end. He always does. Sooner or later, there's a series of cosmic checks and balances that must be addressed. And I think that's what's starting for Brian. You said to me recently that the walls are closing in. And I think the more the walls close in, the harder he's going to fight, the more lies he's going to make up, the bigger he's going to try to go. I think the mayor thing was like one last swing for the fences. Like, okay, I conned all these people out of this money. That didn't work. I'm starting to lose my audience. What can I do? How can I double down? And obviously that's what he thought he could do. And even if he does become mayor, it's going to present with it a whole bunch of challenges, because he's operating from a wound, right? If you look at the source of where he's drawing everything from, it's coming from a wound. It's not coming from a good place. And so that will keep being amplified in the circumstances and events that he attracts to himself. So I don't know, man. He's in for an interesting ride, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the walls closing in. That was when I think I sent over the video that Dorian Yates did. So Dorian Yates is a long-term London Real guest who was going to do an Instagram live with Brian, and then pulled out because he wanted to ask Brian about the digital freedom platform. He wanted to ask him about the complaints about the courses, and Brian refused to talk about it. So Dorian Yates basically pulled out and said, no, I'm not going to do it anymore.
I didn't think it was wise to go ahead with the call and associate my name with something people are not happy with.
That for me shows the walls closing in, because I just don't see where Brian goes. I mean, every time he announces that he's going to do an interview with this person is now going to be, people are watching him. There's Facebook groups, there's Reddit threads, all of whom are really pissed off at him, who will then get in touch with, say, Dorian Yates or someone else and say, you need to ask Brian this question if you go on. And I don't see there's any getting away from that now, because anyone with a publicist, anyone with a press officer who will Google Brian or will have any kind of research whatsoever will see that he's damaged goods.
That's an interesting question. I think the issue is that because the internet
I guess I was more interested in, because you said that the Dorian Yates was one of your contacts originally.
Sure. I mean, almost all the guests initially, of the vast majority of them were from my network. I think the issue, and this comes back to a lot of the things that you've addressed in your work, which is that the internet has allowed, the democratization of technology has allowed people like Brian to have a voice that isn't necessarily as scrutinized as it should be. So while there may be certain people that have spoken out, there might be a Vice article, there might be negative reviews of his courses online, there's still, the average person can just type in Brian Rose and they're on YouTube and they're presented with videos that paint him in a very, very good light. And without a reasonably deep search, they might never stumble upon the things that show the truth about him. And to answer your question, you said, where does he go from here? I think that's the issue, is he can still pivot and still do things because, for example, those people that we saw in the video who are giving him all this adulation and unchecked adoration obviously haven't seen the truth because it's just not been in their sphere of influence, right? They haven't read the Vice article, or they haven't watched Rebel Wisdom, or they haven't been exposed to the things that show the truth. So unfortunately, I think there are a few more corners of the internet where he can run to before ultimately there's no one else to succor or there's no one else to trick. But I think we have yet to see that. I think it's going to take a year or two at the very least.
Yeah, I think it's worth recapping, because there may be some people watching this who haven't been following the story over the last couple of years or so. So the big thing was the digital freedom platforms. We had David Icke on, who he knew was going to say something pretty controversial. David Icke said that COVID was a hoax, that 5G was designed to create a mass cull, which he knew he was going to say. So he knew that YouTube were going to be forced to take that video down. This was at the beginning of the pandemic. So YouTube took that video down. Then Brian immediately pivoted to, I'm being censored by the big tech platforms. I need to create this digital freedom platform, which will be for the people, by the people. And then that's when I got involved, and I was like, hang on, this is a fundraiser for something that is fully owned by you, by Longstem Limited. That blew through $1 million very quickly. After all of this, he was saying, we're going to add blockchain technology, we're going to take YouTube to court, all of these things just to keep the amount going. Then he made the mistake of saying, well, actually now we need 250,000 to keep this thing running. And this thing was just a plug into his own website. Mm-hmm. So his own audience then turned on him in a major way. Then that's when the Vice article came out, and it looked like he was done. But then subsequent to that, the London Mayor thing started up, and that's basically where we are now. Yeah. I don't know what to say, man. I think that people like you are doing good work. Coffeezilla is doing great work on this as well. I think karma will ultimately sort this out. At least that's my hope. I remember when this first happened, the thought that kept running through my mind was, I just hope people see the truth about Brian Rose. And I think they will sooner or later. You can only wear a facade or carry an egoic burden that heavy for so long before it crushes you. I mean, you can see his behavior is becoming increasingly erratic. You can see, like when you look at his face, a friend of mine sent me a message the other day with a screenshot of Brian from something that was on
online, and he said, just look at his face, and you can see like it is weighing heavily on him. The guy looks like 20 years older than he is. I just wouldn't want to be Brian Rose right now, that's for sure.
And how did the London Real project change when you left?
Well, I think I didn't really watch any of it for years. I mean, that's how much of a wound that was to me. I just literally put it out of my consciousness. And it was only last year that I started watching a few of the videos and seeing what he had done. And I think the production values are absolutely superb. I think he basically scaled everything up and doubled down on professionalism. But I think when it really changed is something I knew we would have had to address in this conversation, was when Brian became involved with Dan Pena, which...
your wife says you're a slut that you're living with.
For those of you who don't know, he's an alleged... I think he claims to be a billionaire, or he claims to be an incredibly wealthy individual. And now he runs these self-development boot camps, which teach you how to market your services. And, I've never met Dan Pena, but goddamn, does that guy have a creepy vibe.
You can't help yourself. You ought to go home, mother. Boom, boom. Kill your fucking parents, metaphorically speaking, of course.
And it's clear that Brian attended his courses and is modeling himself on this guy. I mean, remember I said to you earlier, Brian is an empty individual who has to mimic. And you can see by the way Brian dresses. And Brian started wearing those gangster pinstripe suits, and how he cannot see how ridiculous that looks, I don't know. I mean, it's literally a caricature of like a 1920s mobster. And so I think that was another turning point. I think up until that point, Brian might have actually come out of this. He might have seen the truth of the issues that he had to face from his childhood or whatever they might have been. And he might have come out of this and become a force for good. But I think that's where he almost like in Star Wars, when Anakin, finally just gives into the dark side of the Force and says, this is the path I'm choosing. I think that was the point when he started working with Dan Pena. And since then, it's almost like he said, the gloves are off, like I'm going for it. I'm going to do whatever it takes to achieve my objectives, whether that means, I don't want to say stealing from people, because he hasn't stolen from anyone. But if you look at the reviews of the things on his website, on Trustpilot and ScamGuard, there's clearly some people who are very dissatisfied with what they received when they signed up for his courses. I can't speak to, I haven't taken one of his courses, so I can't speak to their authenticity.
The most damning thing, if you want to just sort of say, for being careful of kind of legal issues of I'm not going to say they're a scam, but the credit cards, the way that people have got their money back from this is that they've got the credit card to refund it by telling the credit card that it was missold, and proving to the credit card companies agreement that it was missold. And you've got to imagine, you've got to imagine that the credit card company is not going to give a refund unless you can pretty much prove that there was deliberate mis-selling involved.
Sure, I agree. I think another thing that's telling is that it's my understanding he has a team working full-time to scrub all negative comments from any of his content on YouTube and Twitter and the other outlets, which, again, it's this comical thing that he is presenting himself as literally the opposite of what he is. He speaks about freedom of speech, right? Like that's his whole thing, is he was defending the common man's freedom of speech, and he will defend it till his dying breath. If that's the case, why is he deleting comments that are critical of him and what he's doing? Right? It's obvious, like a man who has nothing to hide has no reason to do that, right? And again, this comes down to you can't fight the whole internet, right? Like he's trying now, he's hired these people to delete these comments, but if you pick a fight with the internet's going to win. Like it's just the facts, right? And I think that's ultimately what will be his downfall, is eventually there'll be enough of a turning of the tide, and there won't be any corners for him to hide in anymore, and the word will be out. But again, as I said, it might take a long time for that to happen.
And we've heard your side of the story. What would Brian say about the time about the reasons for the split?
But that is an excellent question, and I'm very glad you asked that. I think he would say that I was difficult to work with because I'd never had any professional, or I had very little professional experience. I'd never really worked in corporate for any extended period of time, and I was a jiu-jitsu instructor, and so I didn't have the work ethic that he had. I didn't have the I just didn't have the professional abilities that he had. So I was the student who was like, yeah, this is going to be a cool, fun project, and let's just go with it and see how it works. And he was like, let's just do this. Like, so he'd probably say I didn't work hard enough. He'd probably say I didn't want it as badly as he did. He'd probably say I wasn't as committed as he was. And there's probably some truth to all of those. I mean, I've thought about this over and over again for many years. And if I look at the way I conducted myself during that time, I can walk away with my head held high. I mean, even though I had those specific failings, nothing I ever did was with ill intention, or I was never dishonest. And, I did put a lot of work in, definitely not as much as him, but I did put a lot of work into that project, and I did bring a lot of value to it. So, I can walk away with my head held high.
And so what is your biggest regret or biggest pain about that time?
David, in all honesty, I don't have any regrets anymore. And I have literally dealt with the pain of it. It was last year, 2020, that it hit a point when the David Icke interviews started to come out, and people were just calling me out of the blue saying, have you seen this? And I was like, it's just a part of my life I want to forget. But I realized I had to face it and deal with that wound. And in all honesty, I'm so happy with what happened with London Real. Like, I met a lot of great people. It's led to connections with people like yourself. I dated a lot of girls because of it, to be brutally honest. I went on the Joe Rogan Experience. I'd like to feel I impacted a lot of lives positively. I learned a lot. As I said, I learned a lot from Brian. I learned a lot from the guy. He has many, many good elements to him. And I've dealt with the pain of the wound, and I've seen my role in that relationship and the failing of it. And I'm just grateful that it ended when it did, because as a friend of mine said to me recently, he said, just imagine if you had stayed on board and Brian had convinced you to become complicit in all the things that he's doing now. I mean, your reputation would be destroyed. And to answer you, I have no regrets and no more pain surrounding that. I'm just grateful for all of it.
And I know that we've talked about this in the other podcast that we recorded for your channel, but I'm just interested in what your values are, just to get a sense of yourself and where you're at now. What are you doing, and what are your values?
I think my number one value is authenticity, right? I'm just trying to be authentic, not just with people, but with myself. I'm just really searching total authenticity, which is a fucking difficult thing to do. I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago about this. Like, I have the mission that I've created for myself in life it revolves around two things. The first is to have fun. I want to have fun. I want to have fun with my life. And the second is I want to leave this world a better place than when I arrived. And as long as everything I'm doing doesn't violate either of those two things, I think I'm living my values. And as long as I'm being authentic. So yeah, that's kind of what my values are, and what makes me feel like I'm in alignment.
And is there anything that we haven't covered yet that you think we should?
No. Obviously, if people want to talk about, if people want to find out more about my work, I suggest they head to liberationmentor.com, and they can listen to my podcast there. I have a book that I just released on what I believe are the 20 most important principles for living life as an actualized man. It's called Aligned. You can find it on Amazon. You can also get a free copy on my website. I would say to anyone who's considering working with Brian Rose, a lot of people have said to me they had a gut instinct about him when they first started engaging with him that they intellectually overrode. So I would say when you are considering working with him, trust your gut, trust your instincts, listen to that small voice. If there's a warning or if something feels off, just listen to that.
And how would you summarize your position in relation to him now? Like, why do you feel like this is the right time to speak out?
Because he has taken advantage of and hurt a lot of people, and that needs to stop.
Nic, I hope we stay in touch. I really enjoyed our conversation that we recorded on the podcast, and I really hope that your work, I've really enjoyed your authenticity and the depth that I felt in the conversations that we've had for a year now, like genuinely kind of wrestling with whether it's the right time to speak and what your role and what your responsibility is. And I know this is something that you take very, very seriously. And I've been really, I hope we get to meet in person sometime.
We will.
In the not too distant future, and that we stay in touch.
You as well.
Hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, David.